Why are so many people leaving Canada? And am I about to leave too? Let's talk about all of that in today's video. In the last few years, 30 to 40% more immigrants who came to Canada left Canada again. For many people overseas, immigrating to Canada has been this dream, the Canadian dream, but it seems now as though their dreams have been shattered. So in this video, I want to give you the summary of the most popular, for the lack of a better word, reasons that people decide to leave Canada. And this video is by no means intended to either encourage you to come to Canada or discourage you from coming to Canada. I guess the goal of this video is to help you guys make an informed decision so that after this you can go ahead and do more of your own research. So let's start. Reason number one that people are leaving Canada is an economic reason. The high cost of living. Or rather, to be really accurate, it's not the high cost of living on its own, but rather the purchasing power. Because if a liter of milk costs $5, but your annual income is, let's say, $300,000, then the cost of living on its own may not be that big of a deal to you, although still it sucks. But if your annual salary is closer to, let's say, $50,000, then it will become a problem pretty fast. The average person here in Canada spends half of their salary, if not more, just on rent. Nowadays in the city of Toronto, and I guess also Vancouver, you have to cough up around $2,000 just to rent a studio apartment, which is perhaps 400 to 500 square feet large, or $2,325 and above for a one-bedroom apartment. Let's just look at this simple example here. Using this tax calculator here, let's say that you live in the province of Ontario in Toronto and your employment income is $100,000. Your estimated tax is $22,427, which leaves you with an after-tax income of $73,120. If you rent a one-bedroom apartment for, let's say, $2,400 per month, times 12, that is $28,800, which is about 38% of your salary. What if you earn $60,000? And let's say that you're okay to just go with a studio apartment. If you earn $60,000 in Ontario, you're left with approximately $46,000. If a studio costs $2,000 per month, that's $24,000 per year. That means that you're actually spending more than 50% just on rent. Was the cost of living in Canada always that high? I would say yes, relatively to many other countries. But in the recent years, especially after the pandemic, it just got crazy and prices went through the roof. During 1 year, I think it was last year or so, the price of groceries alone went up by about 10%. So as you see, guys, if you are a single person earning $100,000 and up, you can very well survive in big cities like Toronto and BC. Perhaps you just can't save as much money as you would like to, and you would need to really watch your expenses. But if you're a family of 4 here and your combined annual salary is closer to, let's say, $80,000, then you will be having a really hard time here. Now, what about the price of housing? What if you wanted to buy a house? Is that affordable? We'll get to that later. So if an immigrant in Canada wanted to live as comfortable as they expected they could, they would need to quickly earn more money, get a promotion, or switch to a much higher paying job. But that brings me to reason number two why many people are leaving this country, which is limited employment opportunities. There's simply no use if you have 2 master's degrees, 1 PhD, or you even have a medical degree, but you just can't find a job that matches your level of qualifications. And that just seems to be what's happening in Canada. There are just not as many job opportunities as they are in the United States, for example, because obviously the US is a much larger country. But another problem is also that local employers here in Canada usually expect the applicant to already have local experience here in Canada, which, as you can see, is kind of a chicken and egg situation. To get a job in Canada, you need Canadian experience. But how can you get Canadian experience in the first place if that is what everyone expects you to have as a minimum requirement? Okay, to be fair, I do not think that this fully describes the whole picture. Yes, especially in more skilled and higher tier jobs, meaning higher positions, the employer here in Canada would usually expect you to have Canadian experience. It's simply less risk. You are already acclimated to the working style here in Canada, and they do not need to train you on that. You are ready to go from the start. But from my experience as an immigrant here in Canada, yes, you are totally able to get a job without Canadian experience. The only caveat is that only applies to entry-level jobs or internships if you came here as a student. So both my husband and I, we came here as students. So he came on his study permit first and I was on a work permit, and then we switched and I was on a study permit and I studied. So both of us had the chance to go through this studying and working experience. So toward the end of our semester, each of us got ourselves an internship, and that was the stepping stone into the world of work here in Canada. Once someone has an internship and gets good references from that employer or supervisor, then they have a higher chance to get a regular job. However, what does not work is when, let's say you were a marketing specialist in China and you came here to Canada with the expectation to immediately start working in a company, let's say in a financial institution as a marketing specialist, starting at the same level that you left off in China. It is not totally impossible, but the possibility is very, very small. Coffee break. I recently got this French press, which is made of stainless steel. I used to have a Bodum one made of glass, but that broke. So after searching and searching on Amazon, I finally decided to get this one because it would take a lot for this to break. So in case you are also looking for a new French press or other things for your home, then you can check out my Amazon affiliate links in the descriptions below. The third reason that many people are leaving Canada is the price of housing. And this is the reason why not only immigrants leave, but also sometimes Canadians. Most people grew up with the dream that one day they want to purchase their own home, possibly a detached house or at least a semi-detached house in which they can live and start a family. But that dream for most people has been shattered. The price of housing here in Canada, not just in big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, but also in smaller areas, has gone up ridiculously. About 6 years ago, before I moved to Canada, my husband and I used to watch this house hunting series called Property Virgin, hosted by Sandra Rinamoto. And in each episode, we would see people buying a semi-detached or a two-bedroom apartment for $450,000, $550,000, and a smaller apartment like a one-bedroom apartment for, let's say, $350,000, $380,000. And we thought to ourselves, not bad. Expensive, yes, but not that crazy compared to the price of houses in metropolitan cities, even in Southeast Asia. And nowadays, what can you get for the price of $400,000 to $500,000? You can either buy yourself a studio apartment like we recently did, or a, let's say, fake one-bedroom apartment. You know, those kinds of apartments where there's a partition bedroom in the corner, but it's not really a room. So for my husband and I, because we have a rather minimalistic lifestyle, living in a studio worked perfectly, but I understand that it doesn't work for everyone, especially not for people who already have a kid or several kids. They just need more space. These days, it's just much more expensive, and it takes much longer to just even save up for a down payment. In Ontario, the average house price now is $856,269. This would perhaps be a semi-detached condo or a two-bedroom apartment with a minimum down payment of $60,709. At an average salary of just $55,000, the time to save up for a down payment in Ontario would be 11 years. In other provinces like Alberta, for example, it looks slightly more promising. Here, the average house price is $452,000, and to save up a minimum down payment of $22,000, someone with an average salary of $59,000 would need to save up for 3.8 or almost 4 years. And that is why I'm saying that not only have many people left Canada, but also left the larger cities like Vancouver and Toronto for more affordable cities. But because of the influx of local migrants, even there, the price of housing is getting unaffordable pretty quickly. Reason number 4 why some people are leaving Canada is the public transportation system. My YouTube video on how to ride the TTC has been one of the most popular videos on my channel, but if you go to the comment section, you will see a ton of complaints about the TTC. Not just about the TTC, but about the whole transportation system in general, including Via Rail, GO Train, etc. So to be fair, living in Toronto, as long as you're moving around within the core of Toronto, I would say it is pretty easy to get around using using bus, streetcar, and subway. The public transportation system in Toronto here is nowhere as good as, let's say, in Singapore and Japan, or I would say even Germany. I grew up in Germany and lived there for a very long time, and the transportation system is just very, very well connected, not just in the larger cities. Even if you want to go to somewhere more remote, there will always be a connecting train and bus with regular hours. Not so much the case here in Ontario. As soon as I want to travel out of Toronto to some smaller cities, density of the transportation network just becomes much more sparse. And the VR rail, don't get me started on the VR rail. It is constantly late and it stops all the time. But considering that I don't travel as much, I luckily don't have too much of a problem with it. The only problem and rather scary thing is the increased crime on the TTC in Toronto, for example. If you heard news about Toronto, then you must have heard about the increase in crime happening. And that is reason number 5 why many people nowadays choose to leave Canada. There's been an influx in crime, homelessness, and drug use and drug fatalities. In Toronto, you can see homeless people everywhere, and over the last 5 years, I've noticed that it's become worse. Of course, there are people who have been dealt worse cards in life and are really, really struggling, but this is simply not what people immigrating to Canada expect to find. And from what I've seen on the news, it's much, much worse in Vancouver. But of course, to be fair again, on the other hand, you can argue that although there is a significant increase in crime, I'll check the numbers for you later if that's 5% or 10% in a year. You always have to look at the baseline. An increase of 5% from a baseline of, let's say, 1,000 homicides is significantly different from a 5% or even 10% increase from a baseline of, let's say, 2 to 10 homicides. And if we're being realistic here, although the rate of crime has significantly increased in especially big cities in Canada, it is of course nowhere near the crime rates in countries like, for example, Indonesia, where I have been living prior to the 5 years I've been here. That is why personally, these kinds of news have not really affected my life and my lifestyle. But I do understand that for many people here, this has become a very scary development. People move to Canada from, let's say, more dangerous places in the expectation that they would be living in a very safe country where they could just let their children roam, ride the TTC on their own, which of course they can't, but without having any worries. And that might have changed a bit. Now, reason number 6 why many people are leaving Canada, and I think that specifically for this reason, it's not been a recent development, but it's more of a, I could say, classic reason, which is the weather. And as you might guess, people have extremely different takes on this. For a long stretch of the year, the weather here in Canada is cold and gloomy. I would say that it starts getting really cold in the month of November. So around right now, mid-November and November, where daytime temperatures get closer to 0 degrees or freezing until December, January, February, March, and then April, it starts warming up. So for about 5 to 6 months, it's pretty cold. But of course, cold is relative. If you moved here from Russia, then perhaps the winters here in Toronto is nothing for you. If you moved here from the Philippines or from India, then perhaps even in October, you might be feeling really cold. And it's also a personality thing. Some people just really do not like this dark, gloomy atmosphere. They just prefer to have more sun and warmth. It might surprise you a bit, but one of the reasons that I was attracted to move to Canada is because of the weather, because I love the snow and the cold weather, and I do not mind gloomy days at all. But of course, people are different, and for many people, the weather is just too much for them, and they decided to say bye and move to somewhere that's warmer. Reason number 7 why many people are leaving Canada is because the healthcare system has failed them. One super big thing that's advertised about Canada is free healthcare. And to some extent, of course, yes, that's a benefit. You can walk into a clinic, see a doctor, and you do not have to pay for it if you are covered by OHIP, for example, the health insurance program here in Ontario. And while I would say that the quality of healthcare is high here in Canada, the service and the system itself is not all that great. There's a lack of medical personnel here in Canada, and that reflects in the level of service and also normal waiting time. So oftentimes when you make an appointment with a doctor, especially if it's a specialist, you'll need to be prepared for very long waiting times, sometimes a month, 3 months, sometimes even 6 months. If it's not something urgent, then well, okay, you'll just wait. But if it's something urgent and you have to wait that long, that makes you second guess the system. And also from my personal experience, when you do see a doctor, in my case a specialist, the medical personnel, the doctors are always in a rush. And I don't blame them personally for it. They are actually trying to do the best job possible and be there for as many patients as possible, but humans have their limit. If you have to attend to, let's say, 20, 30 patients or more per day, then of course you only have so much time to see a patient. So I feel that every time I see a specialist, I'm really rushing through the appointments. But here again, this is where it becomes relative. If you come from another country where the healthcare system is better, you would be totally disappointed here. But if you come from a country where there is no coverage at all and you have to pay everything out of pocket, then of course coming to Canada is an upgrade. So reason number 8 why many people say they are leaving Canada, why they are not that happy with Canada, is sad to hear, the people. But aren't Canadian people super friendly and polite? I would say yes, they are. My experience has been very positive. As you know, Canadians are known to always apologize for everything. If you bump into them and say sorry, they will likely also say sorry just in case they were the ones at fault and maybe they were standing in your way. So it ends up becoming like, sorry, oh, sorry. Sorry. So Canadians, yes, they are friendly and also they are very polite. But I would say, from my experience at least, they are also very, very reserved. Many people say that in Canada, it is very hard to make new friends because people are kind of closed off, they kind of keep to themselves. So although they're very friendly to you, they kind of keep their distance. And that is also something I noticed when I talk to Canadians. So Canadians who grew up here and have been living here for a long time, I feel that they are very careful asking questions. And yes, that may be because the climate here is that of political correctness, so they are very careful to ask questions like, where are you from? How long have you been living here? When you've just first met, because they are afraid to offend you. Yes, the word offend is such a big thing. You won't believe the kinds of questions that people back in Indonesia would ask me, or even in Germany. So when I was living in Germany, it was much easier to strike a conversation with people and even make friends with locals. But here in Canada, it seems that it's very difficult for people to make friends because people tend to stick within their own circle. So of course, this is just anecdotal and hearsay, maybe even. It would be great to see a study on this. But if so many people keep saying this, then there might be some truth to it. And I would also say that this point affects people who are extroverts versus introverts a bit differently. For me, as a rather extreme introvert, I don't have so much of a problem with that because I'm simply not that social and I'm happy living on my own, doing activities on my own, and I don't always have to be among other people. But there are people from certain cultures and who also have a certain personality, for example, being much more extroverted, who have that strong longing to make friends, constantly hang out with people, being close to people. And that's just something that's not that easy to achieve here. I mean, to make friends, you really have to be the one going out there, approaching people and going out of your way to make friends. It's just not something that will happen automatically on its own. Reason number 9 why some people are leaving Canada is the government and politics. And honestly, I don't want to linger too long on this point, but for completeness sake, I just thought I need to mention this. This is something that I'd say I didn't expect at all coming here. Having lived in Asian countries for a while where social norms are very, very strong, I believe that I really needed to move to a Western country because everything is more free and the freedom of the individual is much more appreciated. But it was only in the last few years that I realized that Canada is not necessarily that kind of a place. And what really made that clear recently were the various bills that were issued, including censorship bills like C-11 and also censorship on podcasts. In addition to that, the scandals in the leadership and also during COVID times, the freezing of bank accounts. So I really do not want to get into this because my channel is not about politics at all. I'm just pointing this out so that you have all the information you need to do your own further research. So having said all of this, of course, every country has something that's great about it and has something that sucks, except for North Korea. Everything sucks there. So of these 9 things that I just mentioned, look at these things very critically. Keep in mind these 2 reasons. The 9 things that I mentioned will affect you differently depending on your circumstances. For example, the high cost of living, which is crazy, will affect you differently depending on what your financial background is and what kind of work you can expect to have here, as well as what kind of salary. The second thing to keep in mind is that these 9 things, of course, are relative to how things are in your own country. So relative to, let's say, how the weather is in your country, the weather in Canada, the crime may be better or worse. So it's not the same for everyone. So I hope this video gave you some food for thought. So as promised, I'll answer the question, am I also planning to leave Canada? The answer is no, at least not for now. My husband and I, we worked really hard to get here, to get our PR after about 4 years or so. It was a really long journey. Despite all of these things, we don't just want to go and leave and look for a better place, because we know that moving to another place will also be faced with new challenges. And at the moment, we just don't have better options anyway. So we are staying here in Canada, not because Canada is perfect, but because I believe that there's still hope. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you pretty soon in the next video. Bye.